Every species in the galaxy knew one rule better than any other. Better than the rule about dark matter lanes. Better than the rule about not making eye contact with a Dravathi elder. The rule was simple. Do not go near the third planet of System Sol. The planet had a name in the old galactic records, Earth. But most species just called it the Red Warning because that was the color of the icon next to it on every navigation chart in existence. Red. Blinking. Permanent. The Galactic Council had placed the quarantine 112 years ago after a long and deeply uncomfortable debate. The records from that session were still sealed, but every diplomat knew the summary. The planet's dominant species, humans, had in the span of 2 centuries managed to split the atom, poison their own air, fight wars on every continent simultaneously, survive all of it, and somehow still increase their population. The Council's official conclusion was 7 words long. We do not understand them. Stay away. And so the quarantine held. Patrol ships circled the outer edge of the Sol system in slow, permanent rotation. Nobody landed. Nobody made contact. Nobody got close enough to find out if the fear was still deserved. Commander Voss had been running the patrol rotation for 9 years. He was a Sulvani, tall and gray-skinned with 4 eyes that each operated independently, which meant he was very good at monitoring 4 screens at once. His ship, the Enduring Patience, had recorded 0 incidents in 9 years. He expected this to continue. The alert came on a Tuesday morning by Earth's calendar, though Voss did not know that. His communications officer, a young Sulvani named Dret, looked up from her console with an expression Voss had never seen on her face before. She looked confused in a way that went very deep. "Commander," she said, "there is a signal coming from the surface." Voss was at her console in 4 steps. "Military frequency?" "No." "Encrypted?" "No." "What frequency?" Dret checked twice. "Civilian network. Standard Galactic Open Broadcast Band." She paused. "They are broadcasting on our civilian network, Commander, from inside the quarantine zone." Voss stared at the readout. The signal was strong, clean, and completely unguarded. Whatever was sending it was not trying to hide. He looked at the content tag. Not a text transmission, not a mathematical sequence, not a weapon signature. Video. "Put it on screen," he said, and immediately wondered if that was a mistake. The screen filled with a grainy image. The camera was not good quality. It showed a kitchen, stone walls, a low wooden ceiling, afternoon light coming through a small window. Standing at the counter was a large human male, wide through the shoulders, dark hair going gray at the sides. He was talking in a calm, steady voice in a language none of them knew, and his hands were doing something to a large piece of dough. He was pressing it flat, folding it, pressing it again. On a chair in the corner, mostly out of frame, sat a very old female human, small and still with white hair pulled back. She watched the male without speaking. Once, she pointed at the dough and said something short. He nodded, adjusted his hands. The crew of the Enduring Patience stood in complete silence. Voss watched the human work the dough and tried to match what he was seeing to everything the Council's files said about this species. Violent, unpredictable, capable of mass destruction. He looked at the old female in the chair. She had picked up a small cup and was drinking from it slowly. "Is this a weapon test?" someone behind him asked. "It does not look like a weapon test," Dret said carefully. "Could be psychological," said the ship's analyst, a nervous Ohari delegate named Rue, who was technically only aboard for research purposes and was currently gripping the edge of a console with all 4 of his upper limbs. "Designed to lower our defenses." Nobody responded to this, because the human on screen had just made a mistake with the dough, and the old woman had stood up from her chair, walked over, moved his hands gently to the correct position, and then patted his arm twice before sitting back down. The human laughed, a quiet, ordinary sound. Voss realized he had been holding his breath. He let it out. "Is the signal still broadcasting?" he asked. "Yes," Dret said, "continuously. It has been running for," she checked, 22 minutes. "Record everything. Send a copy to Council with a priority flag." Voss looked at the screen again. The human was dusting flour across the counter now, humming very softly. "And do not interrupt the signal." Dret looked at him. Sir? Not yet, Voss said. Just watch. Nobody argued. One by one, without being asked, the rest of the crew drifted closer to the screen. Rue had let go of the console and was standing very still, his color-sensing frills cycling through shades that, in Ohari emotional language, meant something like bewildered and something like very much wanting to keep watching. The human on screen set the dough aside, covered it with a cloth, and began washing his hands. Then he looked at the camera, directly at the camera, and said something warm and unhurried, and smiled. None of them knew what he said. None of them looked away. The Galactic Council met in emergency session 31 hours after the first signal. The chamber was a wide oval room built for exactly this kind of crisis: high ceilings, soft lighting designed to keep multiple species calm at the same time, and seats arranged so that no species had to sit directly next to one of their historical enemies. It had hosted debates about wars, about extinction events, about the discovery of new and dangerous phenomena at the edge of the known galaxy. It had never hosted a debate about a cooking video. High Warden Selka opened the session. She was ancient even by the standards of her species, the Veth, who were long-limbed and silver-skinned and deeply formal in all things. She had run the Quarantine Authority for 40 years. She had never had a breach of the Sol exclusion zone. Not once. She was not in a good mood. "The situation is as follows," she said. "A human is broadcasting from inside the quarantine zone on an open civilian frequency. The signal is unencrypted, continuous, and has now been received by 6 patrol ships, 2 deep space relay stations, and," she paused, "an estimated 12,000 civilian receivers on open network." The chamber went loud. Selka let it go for 4 seconds. Then she raised one hand, and the noise stopped. "Our options," she continued, "are to interrupt the signal or to permit it to continue while we assess. Interruption requires a vessel to enter the quarantine zone and disable the source transmission. I am requesting volunteers." Silence. Selka looked around the chamber. "Volunteers," she repeated. A delegate from the HFY stood. The HFY were large, armored beings who had once fought 3 interstellar wars in the same century and won all of them. "High Warden, with respect, it is an Earth signal. We do not send ships into the Sol system. I am aware of what the quarantine says. I wrote most of it. Then you understand why there are no volunteers." Selka set her jaw. She understood perfectly. A century of council warnings had done their job almost too well. Half the species in this chamber would sooner fly into a star than enter Sol space. She moved on. "Then we continue to monitor," she said. "Delegate Rue of the Ohari has been assigned to watch and transcribe the broadcasts. Delegate Rue, your report." Rue stood. He was small, insect-framed, with large, iridescent eyes and frills along his jaw that changed color with his emotional state. Right now they were cycling between pale gold, which meant focused, and a soft amber that, in Ohari language, meant moved in a way I cannot fully explain. "I have reviewed 11 broadcasts," Rue said, consulting his notes. "The male human, who appears to be in his mid-30s by biological estimate, is preparing food in each one, a different preparation each time. An older female is present in most of them. The male narrates his process continuously. I have a partial linguistic analysis, but," he glanced down, "I have not completed the full transcription." Selka looked at him steadily. "Why not?" "I had to rewatch certain segments," Rue said in a tone that offered no further explanation. "Rewatch?" "For accuracy." Selka studied him for a moment. His frills had gone a deeper amber. She decided not to pursue it. "What is the nature of the food preparation? Military? Industrial? Some form of chemical synthesis?" "No, High Warden, he is making a soup. He has made it across 3 separate broadcasts, adjusting ingredients slightly each time. The older female corrects him periodically. In the most recent video, he tried something new and it failed, and he laughed and started again." The chamber was quiet. "A soup," Selka said, "with beans and dark bread." The older female added something from a bottle he did not see. He noticed afterward and spent some time trying to identify what she put in. And did he? She would not tell him. Rue said, and his frills went brightly gold, before he caught himself. Selka pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. What is the current viewership of this broadcast? Dret's report, forwarded from Commander Voss, was on Selka's screen. She already knew the number. She wanted someone else to say it out loud so the chamber would understand the size of the problem. Rue read it. As of this morning, 409,000 receivers across 19 species. The chamber went loud again. Longer this time. Selka let it go. She needed a moment herself. 400,000 in 31 hours, because a human was making soup and his grandmother would not tell him her secret ingredient. We need a containment recommendation by end of session, she said, when the noise died. This signal does not get wider. We will discuss interruption, interception, and if necessary, formal... She was interrupted. A junior aide appeared at her side and placed a tablet in front of her with an apologetic tilt of his whole body. She read it, looked up slowly, looked at Rue. Rue had gone very still. His frills were pale, which in Ohari expression meant deeply embarrassed. Delegate Rue, she said quietly, please explain to the chamber why this broadcast is now appearing on our internal council network. Rue opened his mouth, closed it. I was showing someone, he said finally. The part with the soup. The 47th video was the one that broke something open. It was 20 minutes long. Dario, that was the name Rue's linguistic team had extracted from the other person's repeated use of it, stood at the counter with flour on his forearms and made pasta from scratch, not from a machine, by hand. Slowly, with his full weight behind it, folding and turning the dough the way the old woman had shown him, the way she had shown him many times before based on the easy, wordless rhythm between them. He talked the whole time. He always talked. That was one of the first things Rue had noted in his transcription file. The human narrated every action not like a demonstration but like a conversation, as if there were someone in the room he wanted to keep company with. By the 47th video, Rue had a mostly complete translation. He knew what Dario was saying. He had been sitting with that knowledge for 6 hours before he wrote any of it into the official report, because some of it required him to sit still and not do anything for a while. Dario was talking about his father. Not directly. Not all at once. It came out in pieces, the way things do when a person is busy with their hands and not watching their own mouth. His father had liked this dish. His father had eaten it every Sunday. His father had died 2 years ago, and the kitchen had been his grandmother's before that, and his father's before that. And now it was... He paused, pressed the dough. Now it was his turn, he supposed. He did not sound sad exactly. He sounded like a person carrying something heavy who had gotten used to the weight. The old woman said nothing during this part. She just watched him. Once she reached over and straightened the cloth draped over his shoulder without commenting. Rue filed the translation. Within 4 hours it had circulated to every species monitoring the Sol broadcasts. The response was not what anyone predicted. The Hrev, the armored warrior species who had refused to send ships into Sol space, had a cultural tradition called the Memory Table, a communal meal prepared each year for those who had died in war. Their liaison to the observation fleet sent a message to Rue that said only, "We understand this part and nothing else, and it is enough." The Dravathi, an ancient species who had not eaten communally in 200 years, their biology had changed, nutrition delivered by other means, began debating in their own councils whether something had been lost. The debate had not been held for decades. One elder was quoted saying, "We forgot that food was ever about anything other than survival." The Sen, a hive mind species that experienced most things collectively, reported something they struggled to name. They called it a resonance with no source, a memory of warmth that none of their individual members held. They watched the 47th video 3 times as a collective and produced a 17-page paper on the feeling, which concluded without conclusion. Rue read all of it. He added a note to his file that said, "The broadcasts are doing something we did not expect and cannot easily classify." High Warden Selka received that note at night, in her private office, when the council building was mostly empty. She had not watched the videos. She had made this a specific and personal policy. She watched the 47th video. She watched it without sound first, thinking that would make it easier. It did not. She turned the sound on. She read the translation as it ran. She watched the old woman reach over and straighten the cloth on the human's shoulder. She sat in her chair for a long time after it ended. In the morning, she would walk back into the council chamber and argue for containment. She would be calm and correct and firm. The quarantine existed for real reasons. Fear was not the only reason. The historical record of what humans were capable of doing to each other and to other things was long and well documented. She believed in the quarantine. She did. This was one man in one kitchen, and it changed nothing about what Earth was. She closed the video, opened her notes, stared at them, opened the video again. Meanwhile, on the observation fleet, Commander Voss had cataloged 51 broadcasts. He had begun maintaining a separate personal log that was not part of the official record, in which he noted details. The way afternoon light moved across the kitchen from video to video, the specific sound the dough made when the human slapped it flat, the fact that the old woman always had a cup of something near her left hand, and it was always refilled at some point in the video, and neither of them ever commented on who refilled it. His first officer had started coming to the observation deck during broadcast hours without being asked. Dretto, the communications officer, had learned 6 words of the human's language from repeated exposure. She did not report this. She also did not stop. The Night Ruse translation of the 47th video went out. The open civilian viewership of Dario's broadcasts passed 1.2 million. Dario, sitting in his grandmother's kitchen that same night, eating leftover pasta from a bowl, looked at his camera's signal readout and frowned at the numbers. He did not own a popular channel. He had not told anyone about the broadcasts, except 2 old friends who had politely said it sounded nice. He checked his settings twice, found nothing wrong. He set down his bowl, looked at the camera, said in Italian to nobody in particular, "Who is watching this?" Got no answer. Shrugged. Finished his pasta. The thing about a broken satellite dish is that it mostly doesn't work. It receives badly, transmits inconsistently, and produces the kind of signal interference that makes technicians sigh and write up quotes for replacement hardware. Dario had inherited his grandmother's dish when he moved in, looked at the repair quote, looked at his bank account, and decided the 2 of them would have to find a way to get along. What the dish had been doing for the past 3 months, unknown to Dario and certainly unknown to the Italian National Telecommunications Authority, was punching his video signal through a gap in low-orbit relay coverage and straight up into the open civilian broadcast band of a network that was never meant to reach Earth at all. A 1 in 10,000 atmospheric alignment had opened the channel. It stayed open because nobody noticed it. And nobody noticed it because nobody thought to look for a signal coming out of the Sol quarantine zone. On the 63rd day of broadcasts, the atmospheric alignment shifted by 4 degrees. The signal going out stayed strong. But for 11 minutes, in the other direction, the gap worked both ways. Rue noticed it first. He had been monitoring the Sol frequency so consistently at this point that his supervisor had stopped asking why and simply added it to his official duties. He saw the incoming channel open, checked it twice, and then did something he would later have significant difficulty explaining in his formal report. He pressed the transmit key. He did not send a message. He had no message ready, no authorization, no protocol for what this moment was. He sent the only thing he had, a tone, a 3-second frequency pulse in the mid-range of Ohari communication, which in his species' language carried no words but carried something like, present, here, listening. It went through. The channel logged it. Then the atmospheric window closed, the alignment shifted back, and it was over. On Earth, in a stone kitchen in rural Italy, Dario was filming himself making braised short ribs. He had the heat too high. He was fixing it. His camera's cheap audio pickup caught a faint harmonic hum through the satellite feed. Not loud, barely there. The kind of sound that could be interference or wind or the dish settling. Dario paused, set down his spoon, looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way a person does when they hear something they can't place. He looked at the camera. He said quietly, in Italian, "Is someone there?" He waited. The kitchen was still. His grandmother was asleep in the next room. Outside, a car passed on the road. The camera kept recording. Dario waited another few seconds. Then he made a small, self-aware expression, the kind you make when you've just said something slightly embarrassing out loud, and went back to his ribs. The recording reached the observation fleet 40 minutes later. Rue's team had the Italian phrase translated within the hour. Rue sat with the translation for a while before he did anything with it. Then he packaged it, attached his own frequency log showing the 11-minute window, marked it as urgent and significant, and sent it to High Warden Selka. Selka received it during a routine council session on agricultural trade rights. She read it under the table. She then excused herself from the session, which she had never done before in 40 years, and went to her office and stood at her window for 20 minutes. The human had heard something. The human had asked if someone was there. That changed the situation. The quarantine protocols were old but specific. If a quarantine species demonstrated direct awareness of external observation, the Council's required response was either full communication lockdown or formal first contact assessment. There was no option in between. Selka had written that clause herself. She called an emergency subsession of the 6 senior wardens. No full chamber, no press delegation, no record beyond what the protocol required. She laid out the facts. She was careful and precise. She used no words that would indicate she had been watching the broadcast herself. The senior wardens asked 3 questions. She answered all 3. They voted. 4-2. Formal first contact assessment approved. No announcement. No delegation. 1 message only. Brief. Translated. Direct. To confirm to the human that he had been heard. Selka drafted the message herself. She spent a very long time on it. She was not a sentimental person. She kept cutting the drafts down, removing anything that sounded like feeling, anything that might be misread, anything that went beyond what the protocol required. The final message was 11 words in Italian. It said, "You have been heard. You are not alone here." She read it back 3 times, cleared it for transmission. Then, because she was alone and the record had already been closed, she added 3 more words to her personal copy and did not send them. The words were, "Neither are we." The message went through the standard relay, not through the atmospheric gap which had not reopened, through a dedicated narrow-band transmitter that required a council override code. It reached Dario's dish at 7 in the evening, local time, while he was washing dishes. His phone buzzed. The camera software had picked up an incoming signal. He looked at the screen. The translation app pulled up the text and gave him back something broken and strange. 3 different languages mixed together. Nothing that parsed. He stared at it for a long time. His grandmother came into the kitchen, glanced at his face and looked over his shoulder at the screen. She looked at it for a moment. "Someone is hungry," she said. Dario looked at her, then back at the screen. Then he sat down in a kitchen chair and stayed there for a while, not moving, while the evening light went slowly off the walls. Rue filed a formal petition to the council on a Thursday. The petition requested that the first contact assessment be expanded to include direct communication with the human. It cited 32 supporting documents, which was the highest number Rue had ever attached to anything in his career. Most of the documents were transcripts of comments and messages that species across the network had sent in response to the broadcasts. Reactions from 19 different civilizations, translated into standard galactic script, organized by date. The petition was denied the same afternoon. Rue resubmitted it the next morning with an appendix. The appendix was 40 pages long. It was titled, "What 14 Species Said." When asked what they felt while watching, and could not be summarized easily, because it turned out that 14 species, when asked to describe a feeling, produced very different and very long answers. The HFY response was 3 sentences. "It is like standing at the memory table. It is like the dead are not gone. We do not have another word for it." The Sen collective response was 6 pages and still ended without a conclusion, except for the final line, which said, The closest equivalent in our experience is the feeling of recognizing a signal we did not know we were waiting for. The Dravathi elder who had spoken publicly about communal eating wrote one sentence. I remembered my mother's hands. Selka read every page of the appendix. She did not show this to anyone. She placed it in a sealed folder on her private system with a title she later changed 3 times before settling on, Reference Only. The full council session was called for the following week. Selka had the votes. She had counted them carefully. The quarantine majority held. It had held for over a century, and the reasons were not emotional. They were historical, statistical, documented. Humans were not safe. The broadcasts were not evidence to the contrary. One man making food in a kitchen said nothing about what the species was capable of when frightened or threatened or organized. The Council's job was to protect galactic civilization, and that required keeping certain distances. Selka believed this. She said it out loud to herself twice while preparing her statement, which was something she had not needed to do before. On the day of the session, Rue was given 3 minutes to speak. He stood at the small delegate podium in the lower tier, which was where junior members stood, and looked at the chamber full of species who had been afraid of the same planet for longer than most of them could individually remember. He did not use his notes. He said, I have spent 4 months watching a human cook. I have read what every species in this room felt watching the same thing. I want to say something that is not in my petition. He paused. His frills were steady, not cycling, just one color, a deep, even gold. We quarantined Earth because we did not understand humans. We saw what they did to each other. We saw what they were capable of. We decided the safest thing was distance. He looked around the room. I think we were right to be careful. I am not saying we were wrong. The chamber was quiet. But I have watched a man stand in his grandmother's kitchen for 4 months and talk to nobody while he cooked. I have watched him mess things up and start over. I have read the translations of what he said about his father. I have seen what he does when the old woman corrects him. He nods and adjusts and says thank you. Every time. Rue looked down for a moment, then back up. The thing we feared about humans is not separate from what we saw in those videos. It is the same thing. The same species that could break the world could also stand in a kitchen for hours trying to get a recipe right, because it reminds them of someone they lost. We cannot split them into 2 different creatures, the dangerous one and the one who cooks. They are the same person. He stopped. The chamber waited. I think, he said, that is actually the point. They are like us in the way that is hard to look at, not the comfortable way, the way that costs something. He sat down. His 3 minutes were exactly up. The vote was called. It was not unanimous. Selka had counted correctly. The quarantine majority held. The full quarantine would remain. No ships into Sol space. No broad communications channel. No diplomatic exchange. But the motion on the table was not the full quarantine. It was specifically, authorize 1 message, confirming receipt of the human's awareness. That motion had already passed in the subsession. What the full council was voting on today was the follow-up. Authorize a 2nd message, a question, an opening. The result came in after 7 minutes of counting, 31 for 22 against. 22. Selka sat very still while the result was read. Then she nodded once, closed her folder, and stood. I will draft the follow-up message, she said. Her voice was level. Session is closed. She walked out before anyone could speak to her. Down the hall, past her office, out through the side exit to a small external platform where she could see the stars. She stood there for a few minutes. The vote had gone against her, and she had counted wrong, and she was not sure, standing here in the cold air of the station, whether she had actually tried as hard as she could have to count correctly. She went back inside, sat at her desk, opened a new document, began to write a question that had never been asked of any species in the history of First Contact Protocol. What do you put in the Sunday gravy? Dario spent 2 days sitting with what he knew. He did not call the government. He had thought about it, had the phone in his hand twice, and both times put it down. He knew what that call would become. Men in cars, long questions, somebody in a building far away deciding what to do next. The kitchen would stop being a kitchen and start being something else entirely. He was not ready for that. He did not think his grandmother was ready for that. He was not sure she would care, which was almost the same problem. He went back to his satellite dish instead, stood next to it in the yard in the early morning with a cup of coffee and looked at it for a long time. Whatever was out there, whoever had sent that message with its broken mixed language translation that his app still couldn't fully parse, they had been watching for months. They had heard him ask if someone was there. They had answered. That was the part he kept coming back to. They had answered, which meant they could hear him, which meant they had always been able to hear him, which meant for 4 months he had been cooking for an audience he did not know was there, saying things he would not have said if he knew anyone was listening, and whatever those things were, they were already out. He found this more freeing than he expected. He went back inside, set up his camera, opened his laptop. He had a second-hand streaming app he had never used. He opened it, set the broadcast to live, checked that the satellite dish was connected, took a breath. He started cooking. He made carbonara, not a complicated dish. Eggs, guanciale, pecorino, black pepper, pasta water. Fast, precise, unforgiving if you got the temperature wrong. His father had made carbonara on winter Sundays. It was not the most sentimental dish in his repertoire. He had chosen it because it required his full attention, and he needed that right now. He talked while he cooked. He always talked. This time he spoke in Italian, and then, haltingly, in English, because he had the feeling, and he knew it was strange, that if someone far away was watching, basic English might carry further than Italian. He did not explain the situation. He did not announce anything. He just cooked and talked and explained what he was doing and why, the way he always had. He said, the eggs need to be room temperature or the sauce breaks. He said the pasta water is the whole trick. He said, my father put too much cheese in, and it was always better that way, so I put too much cheese in too now. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I got a message recently that I could not fully read. I don't know who sent it. I don't know a lot about what is happening. He looked at the camera. But I have been doing this for a while now, and it seems like maybe someone has been watching, and I just want to say, it is okay. You are welcome here. He plated 2 portions, put one in front of himself, set the other one directly in front of the camera on a folded cloth, looked at it, looked at the camera. He said, this one is for you. Come over sometime. Then from the doorway his grandmother appeared. She had her cup in her hand and her hair still down from sleep, and she looked at the camera with no particular surprise, the way she looked at most things. She walked to the table, looked at the plate in front of the camera, looked at Dario, and then looked directly into the lens. She said, in Italian, 4 words. Rue had the translation in under 20 minutes. He read it on his screen in the observation relay station, then read it again, then sat very still. His frills went full bright gold and stayed there. He forwarded the translation to Commander Voss, to Selka's office, and to the full monitoring network. The translation was 3 words in standard galactic script, because one Italian word collapsed into one galactic one with no loss of meaning. There is enough. On the observation fleet, Voss read the translation and did not speak for a moment. He then sent a reply to Rue that said only, noted. He sat in his chair and looked at the screen where the live feed was still running. The old woman still in frame, the plate of food still sitting in front of the camera on its folded cloth, and he thought about 9 years of watching a red warning icon blink on a navigation chart. Selka received the translation in the middle of drafting the Council's official follow-up message. She read it, set down her pen, looked out her window at the stars. She finished the message, filed it. It would go out the next morning through official channels with 7 attached disclaimers and a formal quarantine status notice and 3 follow-up protocols and a full council signature list. Then she opened a separate file, her private one, the one with no title, and added a single line at the bottom. She wrote, "The old woman says there is enough." She did not add anything else. She closed the file. turned off her desk light, went home for the first time before midnight in 6 years. 6 months later, the official designation of Earth in Galactic Council records was updated. It still said, Class Omega Death World. It still had the red icon. But below that, in smaller text, in the neutral gray font reserved for addendums, it said, Active Contact. Cultural exchange pending. The Council's first formal question to Earth. The one Selka had written herself, the one that had passed 31 to 22, the one that had taken 4 months of broadcasts and one old woman and one man who just wanted to cook. That question arrived in Dario's camera feed the morning after the live stream. His translation app still made a mess of it, but one phrase came through clean. It said, "What is in the Sunday gravy?" Dario read it again, laughed once, a short, real sound, called out to his grandmother in the other room. She appeared in the doorway, cup in hand. He showed her the screen. She looked at it, looked at him, looked back at the screen. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Tell them they have to come here for that." Dario looked at the camera. He smiled. He hit record.